Hello Koda and welcome. In this tutorial we'll be discussing selectors in Angular. What are selectors? Types of selector, what are selectors? Types of selector, and lastly best practice or tips practices. So to start with, selectors in Angular components determines how a component will be used. Selector determines how a component will be used. In our last tutorial, we discussed components and we generated a component named demo component using Angular CLI, and manually we generated test components. So whenever a component is generated in Angular using Angular CLI, there are files that will be generated in a folder for that component. Most notably, this is a styling file, a template file, and a controller file. That is a TS file that handles user interaction or all the logic for that component. So on checking on the TS file, there is as component decorator that determines or that defines, that marks the class as a component. Inside of this decorator, we have a number of properties. The property selectors, this determines the name of the name that we are giving to the selector, and this name determines how the component will be used. So in essence, the value for this selector property is demo. So whenever we want to use this component, we have to use this name to use this particular component. So when we mention this selector in any part of our app, all the logic, the template, the styling for this component will be rendered in that part of the application. So this selector can be, again, determines how the components could be used. Now the way we have three types of selector. The first one is selector by type selector, which is the default one. So when you generate a component, what you have as default is the selector by type. Let's generate a component and name it, just to demo the selector by type. Let's say by now we should know how to generate a component in Angular. To generate component in Angular using Angular CLI, we are going to type the command like ng generate. You can type it full, like generate components. You can type it full also, component, then the name of the component. So let's call it selector by type. All right, so let's click on enter. So this will generate a folder. As you can see, we have a folder named select by type. This is our new generated components. Let's open the TS file. The TS files again determines the logic of our components. Now, don't forget, we are explaining selector by type. So this is the default selector that you will get whenever you generate a component in Angular. Right, as you can see, we have the name app select by type. You can change this to fit in more to whatever name you want to give it. Let's make it shorter. Let's say app select by type. Let's make it short like this. Okay, let's type it. App select by type. This app is appended. Of course, there is a way to customize this app, but that is beyond the scope of this tutorial. So now we have these components. Let's add some logic in the template file. So this template is what will be rendered whenever our component is used in any part of our application. So let's say this is based on selector by type. So we have this. So let's make use of these components in our app components. If you are using the same application we generated, our first application, you should have the main component with this content in the template file, the app component.html file. You should have this. So for now, let's clear out this content. So where it's empty, then head over to the import of the app component.cs and let's import our newly generated component cell by type component. So we have this component imported in the component that we want to use it. So whenever you want to use a component in a different module or in a different standalone components, you have to import that component inside the import property array. So in the TS, let's mention, do not forget that the selector for this component is app SB type. So, and in this case, we are talking about selector by type. So how do we make use of selector by type? It's very simple. So just like we do for normal HTML tag, that is how we make use of selector by type. So the name is app SB type, and voila, we are now creating an instance of the cell by type component. So in this place now, all the logic, all the template, all the design that we have in this components will be replaced here, just because we are making use of the attribute of the selector for that component. The app is running, so let's open this in our browser. Localhost. Then we have cell by type works. This is based on selector by type. So this is the content of our cell by type components. Look at what we have here. So this is what we are seeing in our browser, and that is how to use selector by type, which is the default selector whenever we generate a component in Angular application. That is that about that in this tutorial. See you in the next one, where I'll be explaining selector by attributes. If you have any question, don't forget to drop it, and gladly I will guide you further. Thank you.